My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. I note the government's prompt attention and response to deal with the impacts of Cyclone Alfred in Queensland and New South Wales. Right now, several communities in central Queensland have been cut off by floodwaters as a 1,600-kilometre monsoon trough dumps rain across Queensland and the Northern Territory. Will the Minister please explain what assistance is being provided by the Australian Government to flood-affected communities in Queensland?
Senator Hanson, as I understand it, Queensland is leading the recovery response, and if Queensland seeks federal assistance, national assistance, then obviously they would engage with us. I'm also advised that NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, has been in contact with state counterparts. We obviously continue to monitor the situation. As yet, that assistance has not been sought, and were it to be sought, I'm sure you would see an appropriate response from the government.
Mr. Senator Hanson, second supplementary.
The Mayor of Quilpie has said there is currently no weather radar service between Alice Springs and Charleville, effectively leaving local communities blind about potentially devastating floods and hampering planning and response efforts. Will the Minister please explain why this region lacks critical weather forecasting service and when the government will address this oversight?
Thank you.
Stay with me, because the full video I'm about to show you puts everything you've just heard into a whole new perspective. All right, settle in, grab yourself a flat white and maybe strap in like you're about to drive through a Queensland downpour, because what went down in the Senate over these floods was peak Aussie parliamentary theatre. We're talking interruptions, procedural wrangling, pointed questions and that classic Canberra dance of state responsibility versus federal response, all delivered with the kind of tone that makes you wonder if someone's about to say, "Mate, fair dinkum." Real quick before we roll the footage, if you're enjoying this content, do me a huge favour, hit that like button and smash subscribe. Over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing. Don't be one of them. It's free for you and it helps us out more than you know. Already clicked? You're awesome. Let's get into the video.
My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. I note the government's prompt attention and response to deal with the impacts of Cyclone Alfred in Queensland and New South Wales. Right now, several communities in central Queensland have been cut off by floodwaters as a 1,600-kilometre monsoon trough dumps rain across Queensland and the Northern Territory. Will the Minister please explain what assistance is being provided by the Australian Government to flood-affected communities in Queensland?
Thank you, and thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Well, Senator, obviously that would generally be an issue that falls within Senator McAllister's portfolio, so I'll try and provide what information I can. I understand that currently there is, as you said, severe weather and flooding.
Order.
I'm just wondering if maybe I could answer Senator Hanson's question. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, stop the chatting across the chamber. Please continue.
I understand there is widespread severe weather and flooding ongoing.
Order.
It's about floods in Queensland.
It's floods in Queensland, Senator McGrath. I would have thought you'd be interested in this, right? I would have thought.
Order. 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 Order across the chamber. Senator Green. I'm sorry, Senator Hanson, you have your right to have your question answered.
And I want to hear what the Minister has to say. I've lost about 15 seconds of her response, so I'd like to hear the time I get a decent response.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Hanson. Please continue, Minister.
I understand that there is, as you said, widespread flooding across southwest Queensland. A severe thunderstorm warning is current for parts of Queensland. I won't go through all of the information about that. As you probably know, Senator, there is a distinction between national emergency events and those which are dealt with by state governments. I'm sure Senator McAllister, much more eloquently than I could explain, when one moves from a state-based event to a state response to a national response. To date, there is not a national and emergency event which has been triggered. and that response has not been triggered. But of course, the government would stand ready in circumstances where those arrangements would need to be triggered. Obviously, we know what occurred in relation to the ex-tropical cyclone, and both Queensland, in southern Queensland, southeast Queensland, and northern New South Wales was very difficult for the community. And you would have seen the government made it a very important priority, not only to deliver services and support, but also to ensure Senator McAllister and Senator Sheldon and the Prime Minister were available to assist the Premier, Crisafulli and others.
Thank you, Minister. Before I call Senator Hanson, I expect Senator Hanson to be able to ask her first and second supplementary in silence and to be given the courtesy and respect to hear the answer in silence. Senator Hanson, first supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, these floods, which came with little or no warning, have had a serious impact on livestock farmers in affected areas. These farmers were dealing with drought only a week ago. What specific assistance is the government providing to livestock farmers in these areas so that the economic impact of these floods will not linger in their communities?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Wong.
Senator Hanson, as I understand it, Queensland is leading the recovery response, and if Queensland seeks federal assistance, national assistance, then obviously they would engage with us. I'm also advised that NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, has been in contact with state counterparts. We obviously continue to monitor the situation. As yet, that assistance has not been sought, and were it to be sought, I'm sure you would see an appropriate response from the government.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Hanson, second supplementary.
The Mayor of Quilpie has said there is currently no weather radar service between Alice Springs and Charleville, effectively leaving local communities blind about potentially devastating floods and hampering planning and response efforts. Will the Minister please explain why this region lacks critical weather forecasting service and when the government will address this oversight?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Wong.
Thank you, Senator Hanson. I would assume that forecasting would be a matter for the Bureau of Meteorology. I'll stand corrected if that's not correct. I don't have any information on that, but I'm happy to take that on notice and provide some information.
So here's the setup. A senator rises in the upper house and directs a question to the minister representing the Prime Minister, none other than Penny Wong. Now remember, this is the Senate, which means Anthony Albanese isn't physically there. He's in the lower house doing his thing at question time, but politically he's absolutely in the frame. Every question aimed at the government carries his name like a watermark. The senator begins by acknowledging the government's prompt response to Cyclone Alfred in Queensland and New South Wales. A polite nod, a quick tip of the akubra. But then comes the pivot, because while the city's got swift attention, several communities in central Queensland are now cut off by floodwaters. A 1,600-kilometre monsoon trough is dumping rain across Queensland and the Northern Territory like someone's left the heavens tap fully on. And the question is simple, sharp and loaded. What assistance is being provided to flood-affected communities in Queensland? Now, if you've ever watched Senate Question Time, you know what happens next. The minister stands, papers shuffle, there's a pause that feels just a bit longer than it needs to be, and then comes the careful framing. Minister Wong thanks the senator and notes that this would generally fall within another minister's portfolio. Translation, not technically my department, but here we go. She confirms there is widespread severe weather and flooding, severe thunderstorm warnings, communities impacted, but before she can fully get going, the chamber erupts into the usual cross-chatter. The presiding officer calls for order, someone interjects, someone else objects to the interjection. We lose about 15 seconds of the response to parliamentary noise, which, let's be honest, is practically a national sport. Eventually, calm returns. Minister Wong explains the key distinction: national emergency events versus those handled by state governments. It's a constitutional tango. Floods don't automatically equal federal intervention. There's a threshold, a trigger, a mechanism. And as of that moment, she says, a national emergency had not been triggered. Now here's where the parody writes itself, because to people watching from flood-affected communities, cut off by water, staring at rising rivers and soaked paddocks, the phrase has not been triggered probably sounds like Canberra's version of computer says no. But the minister adds that the government stands ready, if assistance is sought, if the arrangements require it, if the trigger is triggered. You can almost hear the invisible asterisk hovering in the air. Then comes the first supplementary question and the focus narrows. Livestock farmers. These are people who only a week ago were battling drought. Now they're battling floods, from dust to deluge in 7 days. The senator asks what specific assistance is being provided so the economic impact won't linger in their communities. And again, Minister Wong points to Queensland leading the recovery response. If Queensland seeks federal assistance, the Commonwealth will engage. We're told the National Emergency Management Agency has been in contact with state counterparts. The situation is being monitored. Monitored. That's a word that does a lot of heavy lifting in politics. It's not dismissal, it's not denial, it's not indifference, but it's also not bulldozers rolling in or checks being signed on the spot. It's the holding pattern, the "we are watching closely" phase. And then comes the second supplementary, and this is where it gets properly regional. The Mayor of Quilpie says there's no weather radar service between Alice Springs and Charleville. That's a big patch of country. Effectively, local communities are blind about potentially devastating floods. Planning and response are hampered. The question: why does this region lack critical weather forecasting services, and when will the government address it? Now you can almost picture the moment. The chamber quiets just a fraction, because this isn't abstract policy. This is radar coverage, infrastructure, something tangible. Minister Wong responds that forecasting would be a matter for the Bureau of Meteorology. She doesn't have the specific information, she'll take it on notice. And that phrase, "take it on notice," is the Senate's polite way of saying, "I don't have that detail right now, but I'll get back to you." Now, let's zoom out for a second. What we've just watched is a classic federalism face-off. The Senator's framing suggests a divide. City gets help, bush gets ignored. It's a powerful narrative. Regional Australia versus metropolitan focus. Urgency on one side, process on the other. But to be fair, and this is important, there's no evidence in the exchange of deliberate neglect. The minister doesn't dismiss the floods, she doesn't downplay the impact, she reiterates that the government stands ready if national arrangements are triggered. The machinery of emergency response in Australia genuinely does involve coordination between states and the Commonwealth. That's not a dodge, it's how the system is designed. Still, in the theatre of politics, perception matters. When farmers are watching their stock stranded by floodwaters, when mayors are talking about blind spots in radar coverage, procedural explanations can feel like very thin umbrellas in a very heavy storm. And hovering over it all is the broader political narrative. Every time the phrase "the government" is used, it implicitly includes Prime Minister Albanese. Even though he's not in the Senate chamber, his leadership is part of the story. Supporters would say the system is working as intended. States lead, the Commonwealth supports when thresholds are met. Critics would say the bush shouldn't have to wait for a formal trigger when communities are already underwater. What makes this exchange compelling isn't just the policy details. It's the tension between immediacy and process, between a senator demanding clarity and urgency and a minister sticking to institutional frameworks and established mechanisms. And in true Aussie fashion, it's delivered with interruptions, calls for order, and that uniquely Australian blend of blunt questioning and measured replies. By the end of it, you're left thinking about more than just floodwaters. You're thinking about how a vast country like Australia manages disasters across thousands of kilometres, how regional voices get heard in national debates, how emergency response systems balance state and federal roles. And whether you're watching from a high-rise in Brisbane or a cattle station near Quilpie, one thing is clear. When the rain starts falling in sheets and the rivers start rising, people don't care much about constitutional distinctions. They care about support, information, and whether someone in Canberra is listening. In this Senate showdown, the message from the government was, "We're monitoring and we stand ready." The message from the questioning senator was, "That readiness better turn into action." And somewhere between those two positions lies the ongoing challenge of governing a continent where drought and flood can swap places in a single week. That's democracy in action. Noisy, procedural, occasionally theatrical, but ultimately focused on one very real issue, making sure Australians, wherever they live, aren't left to weather the storm alone.